Hi, and thank you for joining us for part 2 of the financial planning series hosted by the Spina Bifida Association of New York State and being presented by the Association of Financial Educators to celebrate both Financial Planning Awareness Month and Spina Bifida Awareness Month. Here with us again tonight is Paul Hansen from the Association of Financial Educators, and he is going to be going over the financial planning basics. So, Paul, I pass it to you.
Thanks very much, Julia. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for taking the time. This is one of the bigger modules to go through, so it's a lot to cover in the next 50 minutes. Just a brief introduction background on myself. I've been in the financial services business for a little over 40 years. I'm a certified financial planner, chartered advisor in philanthropy, chartered life underwriter, and chartered financial consultant. And on the side, back in the 80s, I used to host a TV show and shown throughout New Jersey called You and Your Money. I currently work for a financial services firm and have, the same firm for the last 20 years. But tonight's program is all about education. There's no product or solicitation pitch in any shape or form. We're going to go through some financial planning basics and a lot of ground to cover. So let's get started with it. So we're going to review a little bit from last week's presentation on setting goals and budgeting. That was last week's module, which is a good foundation of where to start from. We're going to review a couple of the points there, talk a little bit about what an emergency fund is, where it should be invested or set aside into for some clarification. We're also going to talk a little bit about different kinds of insurance. Again, any one of these topics is enough for its own module, but we're going to talk a little bit about everything real quickly this evening. We're going to talk a little bit about credit and debt and touch briefly on some investing basics and asset allocation. We're going to talk a little bit about tax planning as it pertains to pre-tax programs like retirement accounts, college savings accounts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about getting started with retirement planning. And we're going to wrap up with some brief touches on estate planning, which will set us up for the next couple of presentations on estate planning and SSI and SSDI. And we're going to have a trust and estate attorney make those presentations who's a specialist in those areas. So that'll be much more in-depth and specific to those topics. So let's get started with a review of budgeting basics, setting goals. And you can have a variety of goals for your money. It could be paying off a credit card. It could be paying off a car loan. It could be getting another car. You want to save up for a down payment. It could be getting a house, getting another house, getting a bigger house, paying off a house. Perhaps early on, we touch about front run a little bit, home equity loan, paying off a home equity loan. Or it could be saving for college for your children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, for yourself, and take advantage of some of the college savings programs, tax advantage savings programs that are available. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. And the golf clubs is a nice little cartoon for retirement. And number one goal people have is preparing for retirement, and that's a big topic in itself. Not only is it saving enough money to afford the lifestyle that you want, but currently it's addressing how to do that with these very volatile market conditions. And also people are living longer, and longevity is a multiplier risk because you're living longer, so the income has to go longer. That the expenses have inflation on them, so that increases. And as people get older, they tend to spend more money on healthcare, and healthcare is not inexpensive, and particularly in the state of New York, it's very expensive, and particularly in the latter years. So any one or multiple of these goals are acceptable, and it's a matter of prioritizing them and figuring out the strategy to go after each of them. How smart are your goals? So they should be specific. something very tangible. Somebody once said, if it's worth doing, it's worth tracking and recording. So it's not, I want to retire someday. It's, I want to retire with this income on this date. And what do I need to do to get that? I've got the child going to college in 12 years. And what is it that I need to have to make that happen to the degree that we want to? So they should be specific. They should be measurable and reviewed on an annual basis. They should be reasonable, attainable. That, given the resources and time that can be allocated towards achieving that goal, they should be somewhat attainable. Relevant, obviously, particularly to your situation. If it's retirement planning, or you want to save money to buy rental income properties, that's part of your retirement plan. How does it all integrate into how you want to walk down this this path, this life path? And timely is excuse me, not only relevant today, excuse me, but as it pertains to the timeline as to what how it comes to fruition in the future. Write down and prioritize your goals. That's if you can write it down, you can visualize it, you can see it, you can attain it. We talked a little bit about budgeting, well, a lot about budgeting in the last module. To summarize, it's an important strategy. It's an important foundation to embark upon before doing any kind of financial planning or retirement planning. It's important today during our working careers so that we can see what our sources of income are. All sources of income, if it's your W-2 or 1099 on your paycheck, or rental income from property, government benefits you might be receiving, interest, which is income from bank accounts, or investment income, which is typically refers to income from your non-retirement accounts. If you have a mutual fund investment typically, or a bond investment, something that's paying dividends or capital gain distributions that you're taking as sources of income as opposed to being reinvested. So we want to get a handle on all sources of income. And we want to get a handle on all expenses. We talked about it last time, of the differences between fixed expenses and discretionary expenses. Fixed expenses typically refer to the everyday living expenses, your rent, your mortgage, your gas, your utilities, your cell phone bill, your basic insurance, house insurance, fire insurance, car insurance, life insurance, the basic average daily cost of living expenses. Those bills have to be paid to live our lives. And then it's the discretionary, the variable expenses on top of that add to our quality of life. Going out to eat, going on vacations, going to the movies, going to a show, going on a trip, what have you, hobbies, things like that. And those tend to be considered more variable discretionary expense, because, if you don't go out to dinner one extra time this week, is that really going to affect your standard of living? It shouldn't. So when you've got cash flow and you can make that, you can afford that expense, that's great. And when you can't, that comes out of the flexibility in the budget, and expenses typically comes out of your discretionary expense. It's very difficult to go back to the landlord and say, hey, I can't pay the rent this month. That's a fixed expense and should be budgeted. So it's important to have this information today during our working careers, because then any surplus is what we have available to us to set aside for our long-term goals. College savings, buying another house, buying a bigger house, saving for retirement, saving more money for retirement, saving for college, what have you. And this is also important information to have as you are going into retirement and planning for how can I afford to maintain my standard of living. So it's important today during working careers, as well as tomorrow as we plan for our retirements. talk a little bit about an emergency fund and what it is and what it isn't. Emergency fund is funds that are set aside for an emergency. That doesn't mean it's a saving, it's the vacation club savings account. It's an emergency fund. The muffler blew on the car, and that's $1,500 for a new muffler. I need a new refrigerator. It wasn't a planned, the refrigerator stopped working when I didn't think it was, I thought it was going to keep working for another few years. So an emergency fund is just that, for emergencies. It's not a savings account for Christmas, for holidays, for vacations. It typically, rule of thumb, it's 3 to 6 months of, conservatively, it will be 3 to 6 months of pre-tax money. More aggressively, it'll be 3 to 6 months of after-tax money. And typically where you keep this is important. By definition, it should be in an account that is what we call easily convertible to cash without risk of market, meaning keep it in the bank. Put it in money markets, maybe some laddered CDs. Interest rates are coming up. It's almost attractive to put money in CDs again. But you want to be able to have immediate access to this without any market fluctuation and risk, because you know it's an emergency. You need to go to the bank. You need to get the money out to go buy a new refrigerator. Okay, so that's emergency fund is, again, a number one foundation as you're beginning to set aside money for your other goals. It's not a savings account. A lot of people in the last few years, because the market has been going up steadily, said, why do I have this money sitting on a money market account at the bank when, you know, my stock fund is up 15%? I should move it over there. Well, as we know, this year the stock market's not up 15%, it's down 15%. And so you would have experienced depreciation on that, and that's not the definition of an investment for an investment alternative for an emergency fund. It should be in the bank. Risk management and insurance. Again, any one of these topics is worthy of its own workshop presentation, but just to briefly talk about the different kinds of health insurance, we typically think of major medical, hospital insurance. Group insurance through our employers covers that. Also in health insurance is disability, paycheck insurance. In the event of disability, that the insurance company will continue to pay to replace your income that you've lost due to disability. For younger people, I heard some statistics earlier today that actually younger people are twice as susceptible to having a disability as to dying. And so, again, you may have some group disability insurance, but you should review that, because typically the definition of disability changes after 18 or 24 months, and it goes from your previous occupation. They change the definition to unemployable. And so you might want to talk to your advisor to get supplemental disability insurance that integrates with your group insurance for disability. Auto insurance, mandatory. There's minimums, and certainly important to shop around and get the best value that you can for that, given your family constraints, family organization. Life insurance, very can be a complicated area. There's term insurance, there's cash value insurance, there's variable insurance. The cash value is invested in mutual funds or sub accounts. There's a variety of single life or survivorship life. Life insurance is used typically to replace an income earner in the house in the event of death of a husband or wife, and the household needs both of their incomes to pay the bills. Life insurance is typically used to replace that income source. It's also used for charitable gifts. Life insurance is a great leverage way to make a charitable gift to your favorite organization like Spina Bifida. And it's also used for estate planning. Sometimes there's tax planning or gifting or strategies in estate planning that life insurance may be an alternative solution for. Property insurance, fire insurance, house insurance, and liability insurance, umbrella policies, certainly for our homes or renters insurance or our homeowners insurance, for fire or physical damage to the home, property damage. And you've got liability insurance in the event for slip and fall, somebody trips on the concrete and injures themselves and sues you. That's liability insurance. And in addition to that, you might also want to take a look at an umbrella policy, which is an additional level of coverage that is on top of the liability coverage that is in your basic homeowners and your car insurance. Disability insurance, we touched on a little bit with health insurance, different kind of health insurance. And in the latter years, long-term care insurance is more and more popular because it's getting more and more expensive. A lot of people want care in their home and not go into a facility. Many of the insurance policies will pay for home care as well as care in a facility as well. So that's another complex area to make an informed decision about, but it's a great leverage strategy to create a pot of money, a tax-free pot of money that can be used to take care of you and your spouse in the latter years, and particularly as people are living longer and expenses are greater. Let's talk a little bit about credit and debt. So you've got credit, the 3 C's of credit: capacity, character, and collateral. And that's how creditors determine your credit worthiness. How much credit are you applying for? What can you handle? What's been your past history? And that is indicative of your character. Have you made your payments on your credit cards or your student loans or your mortgage or your rent in a consistent basis? And have you paid just the minimums? Have you paid more than the minimums? Have you tended to this as a priority? And what are you pledging as collateral? Is it an unsecured loan like a credit card is unsecured, meaning that in the event of default, the lender has no recourse. I mean, unless they go back and they, go through your house and get your pocketbook or your, tires or your hammers or bicycles or whatever you use the credit card to purchase, the chance of them recovering anything to be able to sell it is slim to none. So in an unsecured loan, the interest rates tend to be higher to protect the lender. With a secured loan or collateralized loan, like a house or a car, where there's a physical entity that can be recalled and resold to help settle the debt, those loans tend to be offer lower interest rates than unsecured loans. This is where your credit score comes in important. There are 3 credit bureaus, credit agencies: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. I would encourage you to set up free accounts with all of them. By law, they are required to give, each of them are required to give you a free credit score once a year. And opening accounts there with the credit unions is no cost. They have some add-on services if you want to avail yourself to that, but to have a basic account is nothing. I would also encourage you to do that because it's a way to monitor fraud. I can tell you from a personal experience. Earlier this year, I started getting letters from banks and credit card companies that were sorry, Mr. Hansen, but at this time we were unable to extend any credit to you. And I started calling around and trying to figure out what it was. The upshot was with the credit bureaus, you can put on your credit report what's called a freeze, which is kind of a a moat, kind of a wall, a ring fence around your credit, that lenders cannot do what's called a soft inquiry to see what your credit score is without your knowledge. And so you can put on the freeze and you can take the freeze off, and it's no cost. All three credit bureaus offer that. And I had done that. I put freezes on all three of the credit bureaus. And so what was happening was somebody had hacked and gotten my social security information and my ID and was applying for credit all over town. But because the credit companies, the lenders, could not get into my credit report, all the applications were being denied. So that was a great safety. That's how I found out that I had been hacked, and I had to file a police report and a government report and all that because I was getting these decline letters because I had this freeze on all of my credit bureaus. So I would encourage you to do it. It can save you a lot of time and frustration, and also tip you off that you've been hacked. So once you go through all this, then what? Well, then what is you fill out a credit application. They get the credit report, get your credit score. The higher your score, the better the terms, or meaning the lower the rates or the longer the terms. It's more attractive because you have been deemed to have credit worthiness, positive credit worthiness, and they're happy to lend you money because you've shown good character in the past. Then the credit is your trustworthiness. Then you incur debt, credit cards, mortgages, student loans, personal loans, unsecured, what have you. And we talked a little bit about the different kinds of debt, if they're secured or unsecured, what the rates are. You get more favorable rates on secured debt because the lender has some recourse, has a physical asset for recourse, where unsecured loans, typically credit cards, they don't have any recourse. They just have to write it off. Important considerations when you're applying for debt is how much are you applying for? How long do you have to pay it back, and at what rate? Common cocktail conversation of, what rate did you get on your mortgage? Are they variable? Is it fixed? Right now, you probably won't have a fixed rate because if it's variable, it's going to be going up as interest rates are going up. So you want to have something, again, that fits back into your budget, that you can continue to afford as a fixed expense, not a variable expense. Let's talk a little bit about investing. And some people consider it speculation, and some people consider it savings. And it really can serve two masters. It's a broader discussion about asset allocation. You might want to have some speculation, but the way that you address that is allocating a small portion of your portfolio to more aggressive investments. And you would, so the challenge with investing, if it's your retirement account or a joint account or an individual account or a custodial account or a 529 savings plan, it's all about spending policy. When do you need the money? How much of it do you need to do? And then backing into an investment policy statement, investment policy strategy that will address that spending policies of when you need the money. And it's okay to have aggressive investments, and it's okay to have conservative investments. The strategy is to allocate appropriately across the various investments options, so that putting it all together, you have a nice diversified investment portfolio. And also, I'd say that you want to be sensitive to taxes as well. So it's not just asset allocation, but it's tax allocation, and doing it in the most tax efficient manner. We talk a lot about risk tolerance, risk reward. In the last few years, a lot of people have thought that the definition of risk tolerance is how much money do I want to make? And it's actually the definition of risk tolerance is how much can you afford to lose? And we're seeing that today in the markets that are going on here in 2022 with the downside. It seems to be going down every day, as opposed to the last several years that seem to be going up every day. So the trade-off is your ability to withstand volatility. Volatility is ups as well as downs, and how that plays into an accumulation strategy is different than how market volatility plays into an income strategy when you are retired. And think of all the people that have been devastated this year because they plan to retire and take systematic withdrawals from their IRAs, their retirement accounts, and the market's down 15%, and they've taken off another 2, 3, 4, 5% for living expenses. So the planning for that is key. It's just terrible what has gone on in the markets, and has caused people to defer retirement, continue to work, or have to go back to work. It's one thing to want to go back because you want a little something to do and a little, coffee money or something on the side. But because of market volatility and not planning properly, people are in a have to mode and not a want to mode. And so it's something to consider in retirement planning. We talked a little bit about investment allocation. You've got income, which is your bond side typically. Your growth side is typically your equity or your stock side. And that's the basic premise of asset allocation, is having the appropriate mix for your risk tolerance, for your income needs. That means having an income need may mean right now I don't have any income need. Okay, but I do have an income need in 10 years from now. Okay. That's why spending policy really drives your asset allocation, so that you are planning for market volatility. We'll get out of this. We always do. This time it's going to be painful, but market volatility rears its ugly head from time to time. You have to address that so that you have the funds available to produce the income that you want to have, need to have, when you want it to happen. So it's figuring out your spending policy, working backwards to your investment policy that takes into consideration your risk tolerance and the timeline. Let's talk a little bit about income tax considerations and pre-tax, benefiting from pre-tax programs and tax deferred growth. And we're talking about your retirement accounts, and we're talking about college savings plans. If you've got a retirement account, putting in money on a pre-tax basis, what that means is if you're in the 20% tax bracket and you contribute $1 into your 401k or your 403b or whatever your company retirement plan is, that dollar, because you're in the 20% tax bracket, really costs you 80 cents. So isn't it great that you're able to get $1 working for you that costs you 80 cents? Who doesn't go shop at Macy's with a 20 off sale? It's kind of the same thing. So you get an upfront tax deduction. There's limits, there's contribution limits that you have for all the pre-tax dollars, because the federal government still needs some of their money today. And this is actually a loan from the federal government. Your tax deduction is a loan from the government that the government wants its money back, that they spotted you that 20 cents on the dollar when you contributed. They'll take it back when you take money out of your retirement plan. Every dollar that comes out of your 401k, not a Roth account, but your tax deductible accounts, every dollar that comes out of that when you retire is subject to tax. You'll see here, if you take money out before 59 and a half, there's also a 10% tax penalty. So money that goes in there is really used for long-term retirement supplement. I've been hearing a lot from other companies that their employees are taking hardship withdrawals because they haven't allocated properly. They arguably put too much money into their 401k, and that was their savings plan as well as their retirement. And if they needed money, that's where they go. Well, they are going there, and they're either incurring loans from the plan, or they're taking outright distributions and paying taxes on it. So again, it goes to basic financial planning and budgeting about how much can you afford to put into these plans, and that you have these other buckets available, your emergency fund, your savings fund, and your tax deductible. There's no one good solution. There's a bunch of good solutions, and you have to put them together correctly and coordinated. You can also, in addition to retirement plans, you've got healthcare savings accounts. Transportation costs can be paid for that. Very popular for us down in the New York metropolitan area, the New York City area, paying for subways and buses and so forth on pre-tax programs. And we talked about retirement plans. The money, once it goes into, particularly on the retirement accounts, once the money goes into the retirement account, it grows tax deferred. That means you don't pay taxes on the earnings of the investments until you take them out. And the definition of tax deferral is the ability to earn money on the money that you would otherwise send to the government in the form of taxes. So it helps the compounding effect. So it allows you to get a larger pot sooner, because you're not having to take out some pennies and nickels and nickels and dimes and quarters to pay the tax on the annual earnings. Sometimes the qualified distributions are tax-free if you're putting money into a Roth account, Roth retirement. That's not deductible on the front end, so it's tax-free on the back end. The 529 plans typically are not federally deductible. Some states have some state income tax deductions for them, but if the money is used for a qualified educational expense, that money also comes out tax-free. So and if they're not, there's taxes and penalties on them if the money isn't used for qualified educational expense. There's taxes and penalties on withdrawing those funds, but those 529 plans can be moved around to other children or grandchildren or in the family for someone else to use if you find that they're not using the funds that are available. So let's talk a little bit about the value of compounding. The value of compounding is just this. So you've got, for example, $10,000 invested in year one, lovely 6% annual growth rate. Wouldn't that be great? Each and every year, that's a fantastic growth rate on an annual consistent basis. Let's assume that you're in the 24% tax bracket, and you're going to pay the taxes with account from something else, with account assets from this account. I'm sorry, from this account. So you put in $10,000 in year one, and 30 years later, if it was in a tax deferred account, that $10,000 at 6% would grow to $57,435, and that's a great sum of money. And however, if you put it in a taxable account where that 6% was taxed at 24% every year, you would only accumulate $38,104. So the power of tax deferred compounding is the difference between $57,000 and $38,000, almost $20,000 difference. The green box also shows that even if you withdrew all the money in 30 years and paid the tax at 24% on the whole $47,435, you would still net $43,651, still about $6 grand more than had it been in a taxable account. So just a brief little simple illustration to show the value of tax deferred compounding. 529 plans we talked a little bit about before. They are individual accounts. They are typically offered by states or by financial institutions. They typically have pre-established portfolios that are either risk-based or time-based, depending upon how long the child has before they go to school. And the institution has some recommendations for the different kinds of portfolios. They are portfolios, they are invested portfolios. They're typically portfolios of exchange-traded funds or mutual funds. Their returns are not guaranteed. You're not investing, you're not giving money to a bank, you're giving it to a money management firm to handle. Even if you give it to the state is contracted and selected their investment manager. Can be used for any college or K through 12 school as well. In addition to 529 plans, they also have, states have prepaid tuition plans where you can prepay tuition today with a guaranteed return to go to a state institution of an institution of that state, in-state public colleges, typically not private schools in that state. So another great tax advantage way to save for retirement. Tax deferred growth, potential tax-free earnings, meaning that if you withdraw the money for qualified expenses, and the money comes out tax-free. Withdrawals not used for college expenses or K through 12 tuition, subject to income tax and a tax penalty. Fees and expenses vary with each kind of plan, and you should read the prospectus and talk to the plan provider as to their expenses for each of the plans. We talk a little bit about retirement planning and the value of starting today and not putting it off. The nice blue line, if you had put in $3,000 per year, and it grew at 6% straight line growth, terrific number, and reinvested all of the earnings and did not pay any tax because you're in a tax deferred account, $3,000 a year from years age 20 to 65, 45 years, you'd amass a pot of $679,000, a reasonable sum of money. If you waited 15 years and started at age 35 instead of 20, the same $3,000 would only grow to $250,000. And if you waited another 10 years and started at 45, it would only grow to $120,000. So the concept trying to be communicated here is start early, even a small amount of money. You're letting the markets make up the difference, and it's sitting and growing and staying invested for 45 years. It can have a dramatic effect overall in the portfolios balances that you can accumulate. What happens the longer you wait? Well, we assumed a $3,000 annual contribution. Well, if you wanted to get to $670,000 and you started 10 years, 15 years later, you'd have to be putting in more than $3,000 because you don't have the time, but maybe you've got the money now that you're older and your paycheck and your career is higher than what it was 15 years ago. So you may have the money, but you may have a couple of kids and a bigger mortgage that may constrain that as well. So everything's a trade-off. You need to take a look at it. Basic retirement considerations. What kind of retirement do you want to have? Financial independence? You don't want to work again? Sorry, it's my dog sneezing. You don't want to work again, financial independence, or having a part-time job, give you something to do, or working a hobby, turn a hobby into a business. That's fine. You want freedom to travel, pursue hobbies, not have to go back, and you want to travel around, great. Ability to live where you want. A lot of people move out of New York because of the state taxes, and they move south because they can save on the taxes, and there's probably arguably not as much snow in Florida as there is in upstate New York. An opportunity to provide financially for children or grandchildren. This brings up a point that I like to talk about. You see a lot retirement planning guidelines in the media. You'll see a number, often it says that you should plan for 60 to 70% of your pre-retirement money, pre-retirement income. I would challenge that, because what I've seen over 40 years is that when people get to retirement, they don't plan to spend any less money against their standard of living than what they did while they were working. So I think a more conservative approach is to plan for 100% of your pre-retirement money income. Now, arguably, the media says you only need 60 to 70% because you're not going to have work-related expenses. That's true. I would suggest that the work-related expenses are going to be replaced by a couple of things listed here: travel, hobbies, children, grandchildren. So a more conservative approach is always assume that you're going to spend exactly the same amount of money as you spent last year, maybe more. What you're going to spend it on will be different, but it's nice to have that money and to be able to make that choice. And particularly as we travel through retirement and get older, some of these expenses will be taken up by additional medical expense. And isn't it comforting to know that you can afford the kind of medical expense that you want to have, not that you have to have? So again, I would suggest that a more conservative retirement planning approach is plan for 100% of your pre-retirement money, not a nickel less. Gives you the flexibility to spend it. I've never seen anybody send back money. When you want to retire, the earlier you retire, that's great. But what that means is the shorter the period you have to accumulate those funds and the longer you'll be drawing from them. And longevity, as we mentioned earlier, is a money multiplier, a risk multiplier. Is not only do you need the income for a longer period of time, but expenses go up. What you're spending it on will increase over time. And certainly healthcare in the latter years can be very expensive. So it's okay to want to retire early. Just think of all the downstream implications that can have. Social Security isn't available to age 62. There's a calculation called full retirement value or benefit. And you can avail yourself of that and figure that out if you go to ssa.gov, the Social Security Administration website. Open up an account for yourself. If you don't already have it, it's free. It's available. You can check your credited earnings. There is calculations. They'll have some scenarios there that will show you what your income can be if you retire early and you take something less than full retirement benefit, or if you work to latter years and how much it might increase. Medicare eligibility begins at age 65. One of the things that I don't think is communicated well is you have to pay premiums for your Part B hospitalization and your Part D prescription drugs. The premiums that you pay are dependent upon how much income you bring in. The more income you bring in, the higher your premiums. There's no increase in services and benefits, but because you have more adjusted gross income, called MAGI, modified adjusted gross income or provisional income, it will cause your premiums to increase. With proper planning, you can minimize those expenses while maximizing your income. So that's something to talk to your advisors about. How long will retirement last? Average life expectancy is arguably is increasing. Last year, I think it actually decreased by a year or two. But overall, the great fun fact is when Social Security was started and they were paying the benefits at age 65, the average life expectancy was 57. There was no intent that Social Security ever paid out, and now it's an important component of our overall retirement planning. So life expectancy probably over time will increase. It may last 25 years or more, or it used to be a conservative retirement planning. I remember years ago, we planned for 25 years of retirement. Now we're talking about planning for retirement 25 to 30 years. My father's personal situation, my father was retired longer than he worked. So having some sort of pension income, Social Security income that you can't outlive is more and more important, particularly it addresses market volatility and longevity. And for joint lives, both spouses or a spouse and a child or spouse and a sibling, whatever your status is, but it's important piece to take a look at. Let's see, where are we? Tax deferred retirement savings vehicles. We talked about 401ks, tax deductible plans. Take full advantage if your company offers your 401ks and they have a match. At the very least, contribute what the match is. That's 100% return. If they match the first 3% or 2% or whatever they do, that's 100% free money. Setting aside any market performance that you would have on that money, that means if you contributed $2, your employer would contribute $2. You now have $4. And your $2 was tax deductible. If you're in the 20% tax bracket, $2 actually costs you 20% of $2 is 40 cents. So it actually costs you $1.60 to get the investment of $4 working for you. So again, take a look at your employer plans, what's available. Do they have a match? To what degree? Certainly participate in there, and at least get the employee match, and then take a look at the investment options and talk to the HR department or your advisor about having an appropriate allocation to invest that money based on your age and risk tolerance. If you take money out before 59 and a half, again, it's not only taxes as earned income, but it's also a 10% penalty. Everything's figured on the gross amount taken out, meaning if you take out $1,000 and you're in the 20% tax bracket, you'll pay 20% on $1,000, $200. You'll also pay 10% on the original $1,000, not the after-tax amount. So that's another $100. So you take out $1,000, 20% tax bracket costs you $300. So it's just not to say that you can't do it, but they want you to think about what you're doing before you do it. And they want their tax deduction back. They give you a tax deduction to put money into the account. This is time when you have to pay it back. Estate planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about incapacity and specific more in-depth estate planning with you in the next module, where Vlad Portnoy, a trusted estate attorney, will be here to go into this more depth, but let's touch on some basics here. Everybody has a will. I don't know if you know it or not. If you don't have one, the state has a plan for you. It's called intestacy, dying intestate, and the government will decide how to spend your money and divvy up your money for you. Probably not the way you want to do it. We'll talk about a brief example. Wills are the cornerstone of any estate plan. You should have a will. It gives you the control to dispose of your assets the way that you want to, and not the way the government wants to. Trust can be very effective as controlling vehicles, as tax vehicles, and incentive trusts. So we'll talk a little bit briefly on revocable and irrevocable trusts, and trusts you set up today, living trusts, or trusts that are set up upon your death, called testamentary trusts. And planning for incapacity, power of attorneys, healthcare proxy, and the like. Let's give a brief little example about intestate and what intestacy looks like. So typically, when husband and spouse, one spouse passes on, they want all of their assets to be transferred to the surviving spouse. If you don't have a will, most states will split the money up like this. If you've got kids, half of the money will go to surviving spouse, and the other half of the money will be split up amongst your kids. That's usually not what people want. They want surviving spouse to get all of the money for their health maintenance and support during their lifetime. And then upon the second passing, it can go to the kids. But that's why it's important to not let the government spend your money for you. You need to do your own planning, and a simple will take care of that for you. It also allows you to name guardians for minor children and dispose of your assets the way that you want to. Basic will. It's a cornerstone of any estate plan, directs how your property will be distributed, how you want your assets to be distributed, not how the government is going to distribute them for you. Allows you to name your own executor and guardian for minor children, can accomplish other estate planning goals, such as minimizing taxes or charitable bequests, and must be written, signed, and witnessed. Each state has their own requirements, but broadly, that's got to be written and signed and witnessed for it to be a valid will. In the event of incapacity, can strike at any time. Failing to plan means a court would have to appoint a guardian. Again, doing your own planning allows you to appoint the people that you want to be in charge of your health care or your family or your minor children. So the court appointed guardian may not execute according to your wishes. They may be doing it legally and by law and what the court dictates, but it may not be what you want. And so a basic estate planning package that trust and estate attorneys typically offer are wills, power of attorney, and healthcare proxy, so that you're protected at the time of death or in the living death where you're here but cannot make informed decisions for your care or sign legal documents on your behalf. Someone can step in and do that. We talked briefly about trusts. Trusts are a vehicle that allows you to control the distribution of your assets after you're gone. Typically, testamentary trusts can set them up for generations or for particular children or family members or friends that you want to have typically income being dispersed on a periodic basis for that person. In addition to federal estate taxes, there are state inheritance taxes, and there are probate expenses. Probate expenses are the fees paid to the court for the process of validating your will. That typically can be alleviated by setting up a revocable living trust today. And that means a revocable living trust. Living means today. Revocable means you have full access to the money. It's not irrevocable. It's not ring fenced off. There's not a moat around it, but it's done for the sheer value of protecting your assets from the cost and the time delay of the probate process. So again, something to speak with your trust and estate attorney about as well. Well, that wraps it up. That's financial planning basics in 57 minutes. And I want to thank you for your time this evening, and I hope you found it of value, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week with Vlad Portnoy, a trust and estate attorney, that we'll talk a little bit more about these topics, these latter topics in depth. I'll be there, but Vlad will be there as well. So Julia, thanks a million for letting me talk to your group this evening, and I'll hand it back to you, I hope.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul, for another very important presentation for our group and getting through so much information in such a speedy time. It is very appreciated.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.